No wheels, old man? Get real! The boy's laughter cracked like a firecracker in the open air, sharp, brash, and cruel. The red-hooded teenager stood over the slumped figure of Henry Grayson, grinning wide as his foot slammed down onto the detached wheel of a broken wheelchair. The other boy had already done the damage, yanked the armrest loose and tossed it into the gutter like trash. It rolled twice and stopped against the curb, wobbling. Bits of plastic and steel rattled across the pavement. Henry sat still, 84 years old, his frame weathered, his eyes set beneath a cap embroidered with the faded gold of the Korean War's 2nd Infantry. He didn't react, not with words, just a subtle draw of breath as he straightened his back, one calloused hand gripping the cracked push rim of what was left of his chair, his lips pressed together, not in fear, not in weakness, but in restraint. Behind them, a dog barked once from behind a fence. The street was quiet otherwise. A stroller slowed to a stop. A woman across the sidewalk pulled her child a little closer, and in the distance, soft at first, almost indistinct, the low churn of engines stirred the air. A reflection caught in the glass of the library entrance shimmered with red and blue. Inside, a man in a uniformed patrol shirt had frozen halfway through, tossing his coffee lid into the bin. He turned, slowly, eyes narrowing on the courtyard outside. He didn't move, not yet, but the quiet had changed, and something was coming. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. Henry Grayson had been coming to the Westbrook Public Library every Thursday for almost 17 years. Same hour, same route, same quiet ritual. The library staff never asked why. They didn't need to. Some people came for books. Henry came for stillness, not silence. He had known enough of that in foxholes and field hospitals. But stillness. A place where the world slowed down enough to feel the weight of memory and the worth of a man who had survived it. At 84, Henry's body moved like it was reading an old story in worn print. Every turn slow, deliberate, meaningful. His chair, an older model with scuffed wheels and a squeaky caster, was a stubborn beast. It dragged left when the sidewalk dipped and rattled like loose bones across the expansion cracks in the concrete. But Henry never complained. The brass plate on his cap had dulled with time, but the stitching was still firm. 2nd Infantry Division, Korea. Most folks passed him without reading it. A few nodded, fewer asked. He never offered stories unless someone truly wanted to hear. Respect wasn't in medals or salutes. It was in quiet patience, and how a man treated others when no one was watching. Today had begun like any other. He'd rolled in just past noon, pausing beneath the ginkgo tree outside the entrance. A soft breeze stirred the golden leaves above, and a few danced down around him, like they remembered him. He'd reached into his satchel for a folded cloth and wiped dust from the rim of his wheels, not for pride but precision. Old habits from the battlefield lived on in small gestures. And then came the boys. They'd been circling for a few minutes. He'd noticed them in the corner of his eye, a flash of red, the glint of metal from a chain, a voice with that slightly too loud pitch of a teenager craving attention. Henry had hoped they'd just pass. Most did. A few barked insults. Sometimes a slushy cup was tossed his way, never enough to bruise. But today, something lingered. The chair was acting up more than usual. The right wheel had begun to slip on inclines. He'd tightened it last week with the small toolkit he carried under the seat, but rust was patient, and time had its own way of making adjustments permanent. As Henry reached down to push himself forward toward the door, the red-hooded boy stepped into his path. "What's the point of rolling around in that thing anyway?" he asked, voice lilting into mockery. "Ain't you supposed to be in, like, a home?" The other boy, leaner, taller, snorted. "Yeah, rolling into the grave, more like." Henry didn't respond. He simply gripped the rim, leaned forward, and tried to move. That's when the blow came. A sharp yank to the armrest, then the crack of splintered plastic and metal, and the words that still hung in the air like smoke. No wheels, old man. Get real. His chair rocked, unbalanced. One of the footrests scraped the concrete. Henry's boot slid ever so slightly, but he righted himself, not with help. Just discipline. A car slowed at the crosswalk across the street. The driver looked, frowned, and kept moving. Henry bent slowly, deliberately, to retrieve the snapped piece of his chair, as if it were a memento, something sacred. He placed it on his lap, not with bitterness, but with the kind of care a man gives to something that once carried him further than his legs ever could. From inside the library, behind the pane of shaded glass, a clerk adjusted a stack of returns. Her eyes flicked upward. She froze. There was movement now beyond the intersection. A glint of chrome, a stutter of tires, and above the din of the boys' laughter, a single sound began to grow clearer. Two low, steady engines rumbling, getting closer. The wind had shifted by the time Henry reached the library courtyard. A scattering of dried leaves curled along the cement path, spiraling near his wheels as he pushed forward with uneven rhythm. One wheel turned smoothly, the other dragged slightly, scraping in intervals, like a breath caught in the throat. He kept his hands firm, fingers curled tightly over the rubber rims, steering the chair as if navigating a minefield only he could see. The courtyard was alive in that quiet way public spaces often are. Not loud, but full. A young mother settled her infant into a stroller near the fountain. A boy with headphones danced in short, awkward bursts, oblivious to anyone watching. A man read a paperback on the far bench, his coffee forgotten beside him. They were all living fragments of their own small afternoons, and none of them looked at Henry. He didn't expect them to. The sun slid gently behind a cloud, washing the courtyard in soft gray. It was the kind of light that smoothed everything out, softened wrinkles, dulled edges. But not for Henry. His silhouette was sharp in the wheelchair. Stiff shoulders, spine straight as a fence post. The missing armrest exposed the rusted inner rods, a few flecks of black paint dangling like loose threads. As he crossed the brick groove near the center planter, the right wheel caught, not hard, just enough to jolt the frame. Henry steadied it with a controlled breath and leaned into the motion. He didn't flinch or grimace, but the strain in his jaw showed. The red-hooded boy was still watching, leaned lazily against the bike rack, smirking. He's so old, man. What's he even doing here? The taller teen snorted. Trying not to fall apart, I guess. They didn't speak loudly, but not softly enough to pretend it was private. The words reached Henry, like wind in a narrow hall. He heard them, let them pass. Two middle school girls paused near the library doors. One held a notebook to her chest. The other glanced toward the boys, then at Henry. Her brows furrowed, unsure. Not old enough to intervene, not taught yet that silence could weigh more than action. Henry rolled forward, past the fountain, past the metal sculpture of open books welded in rust-colored arcs. His wheels scraped again, this time louder. The librarian at the front desk saw him through the windows. A flash of concern crossed her face, but she didn't move. A phone rang behind her. She turned away. The pain in Henry's shoulder was familiar, not sharp, dull and constant, like a memory that never quite fades. He adjusted his position subtly, transferring weight to his left side, easing the ache without breaking stride. Every inch he moved was measured, not rushed. There was dignity in his slowness. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7, sat on the edge of the planter, cradling a half-eaten apple. He watched Henry with wide, curious eyes, not mocking, just interested. The kind of gaze only children can give, unfiltered. When Henry passed, the boy lifted his apple slightly, as if in greeting. Henry gave him a faint nod, not a smile, just acknowledgement. The chair creaked beneath him as he approached the ramp. Its right side dipped unevenly where the concrete had settled over time. Henry lined up the wheels precisely, as he always did, pressing forward with the full control of a man used to getting there on his own. His breath was audible now, not labored, just present. Each push from his arms a quiet resistance to time itself. He reached the base of the ramp. The red-hooded boy whispered something behind him, words he didn't need to hear again. The sound of a shoe scuffing concrete, a metallic click, laughter, distant but familiar. Henry stopped. He looked down at his lap, where the broken armrest still rested like a wounded limb. He reached down, fingers slow but sure, and adjusted it so it wouldn't slide. A pigeon flapped noisily to the far end of the courtyard, startling no one. Inside the library, fluorescent lights hummed softly. A girl leaned against the front desk, asking about history books. The clerk nodded, but her eyes drifted again to the glass. Henry reached for the worn push rim with his left hand and leaned into the ascent. The chair protested. The right wheel dragged worse on inclines. He fought for traction with practiced subtlety. No visible strain, but his shoulders shifted, back angled with military form. A pair of teenagers at a nearby table chuckled, watching through the window. Still, no one moved to help. The boy with the apple stared, mouth slightly open, as Henry's chair crept upward inch by inch. One man, one motion, one choice. And the courtyard held its breath. The ramp wasn't long, but it demanded effort, not just of the body, but of the will. Henry's left arm pushed steadily, the muscle in his forearm taut beneath weathered skin. Each inch upward was a victory wrestled from years of gravity, rust, and quiet disregard. His right hand gripped the weakened wheel, the broken armrest jostling slightly with every motion. The soft grind of rubber on rough concrete made a faint stutter-step rhythm behind the hush of the wind. At the top of the ramp, just outside the library's front entrance, he stopped. Not to rest. He never did that in public, but to adjust. He repositioned the damaged piece of his chair on his lap, tucking it slightly beneath his satchel, like one might conceal a wound not ready to be shared. His fingers moved gently, brushing away a smudge of dirt as if it mattered, as if dignity still had to look clean, even when everything beneath was cracking. Then the sound came again, too close now. A scrape of shoe on pavement, a spit of laughter, the shuffle of teenage feet trailing where they didn't belong. "You still going, old man?" The red-hooded boy had followed. Should have rolled into a scrapyard instead. Henry didn't turn his head. He looked ahead, straight through the double-paned library doors, into the cool light within. Shelves lined in silence, dust caught in beams of overhead fluorescence, familiar ground. A shadow moved beside him. Then the taller boy stepped into view. He circled the chair slowly, like a cat around prey that wasn't moving fast enough to be interesting. He stopped just behind the right wheel and bent slightly. Henry felt it before he saw it. The subtle tremble, the weight shifting. Then, a hard kick. The front caster popped from its mount with a hollow metallic snap. The chair jolted forward half an inch. Henry's legs, strapped in loosely by his routine belts, shifted awkwardly. His boots skidded against the mat. The pain wasn't in the body, it was in the sound. That cruel finality of something precious broken for no reason at all. "Oops," the tall boy chuckled. "Didn't see that there." A mother near the far bench gasped softly. She stood halfway, pushing her stroller forward, unsure. The red-hooded one raised his hands mockingly. "Hey, careful, lady. Wouldn't want you catching a bravery award." His voice curled into venom, disguised as charm. She hesitated, eyes darting to her toddler. Her hand rested on the stroller bar. She took one step forward, just one, before the boy's stare stopped her. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but there was something in the way he grinned. She sat back down, her lips pressed into a line of quiet shame. Henry looked down at the wheel, now half detached and tilting like a broken ankle. He placed his hand over the gap, just to steady it. No words, no sigh. The courtyard grew quieter. Someone inside the library peered out from behind a shelf. A clerk leaned to whisper toward another, motioning toward the front desk phone, but not moving. Outside, the boys began to lose interest. Their game was no longer fun now that it was too easy. The tall one stepped back and muttered, "Whatever, just a piece of junk anyway." He kicked the broken caster down the ramp. It rolled unevenly, clattering to a stop near the storm drain. Henry's eyes followed it only for a moment, then back to the sky. The breeze had shifted, slightly cooler now, with a faint pulse of vibration that wasn't from the earth. From beyond the trees, 2 low rumbles carried into the square. Not tires skidding, not engines revving, but the unmistakable thrum of law enforcement cruisers. Their approach wasn't cinematic. It was steady, controlled, and it was coming closer. The red-hooded boy turned his head toward the sound, eyebrows twitching in a brief moment of alertness. From across the courtyard, just past the bench and the water fountain, a uniformed figure began moving, not running, but walking with purpose. His badge caught the sun. His steps matched the tension in the air. Inside the library, the clerk finally picked up the phone. Outside, Henry adjusted the cap on his head, straightened his posture, and placed both hands on the armrests, one broken, one barely holding, and he waited. Henry didn't move. Not when the wheel hung lopsided like a broken compass. Not when the laughter faded into snorts and whispers. Not even when the taller boy spat on the sidewalk beside him and muttered something that barely carried over the breeze. Instead, he reached into the breast pocket of his windbreaker, slow, unshaken, and pulled out a square of flannel cloth, blue, folded neatly, soft from age. With methodical care, he began to wipe the grime from the edge of the armrest that remained, one small circle at a time. The boys watched him. They waited for some outburst, some collapse, but it never came. There was no plea, no anger, no defeat. Just that cloth, moving in circles, steady and quiet, as if the act itself were more important than what had just happened. The taller one clicked his tongue and kicked at a loose pebble. The sound echoed sharper than it should have, out of place in the stillness Henry had reclaimed. A breeze rustled through the courtyard trees again. Leaves whispered down from the high limbs, golden and brittle, scraping softly as they landed around the wheels of the chair. Henry folded the cloth again, once, twice into a square, small enough to slip back into his pocket. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear or weakness, but from use, like old tools that had been good to a man, and still were, even if they creaked. From beneath the chair, a soft, metallic glint peeked from his duffel. A single dog tag, worn on a chain, brushed against the edge of the frame as he adjusted the strap that kept his legs braced. The initials were barely legible anymore. Time and oil had worn them thin. But they were his, and they'd seen more than any teenager mocking him ever would. He looked down at the cracked wheel. It listed outward, the axle bent from the last kick. The screws were stripped, metal flaking like old paint. Henry studied it with the eye of someone who once fixed tanks under fire, who learned to adapt in mud and heat and smoke. This wasn't defeat. It was just another thing broken, another thing to fix. A faint vibration moved through the ground now, unmistakable, coming closer. He didn't look up, didn't scan for the source. He simply pressed his palm over his knee, a habit left over from the time before the chair, when standing required just as much effort as sitting now did. A memory flared, quick and vivid, a jungle path, sweat burning his eyes, the weight of a rifle, a friend crumpled in the clearing, the scream of mortar far off, and the desperate push of adrenaline that kept him crawling forward to drag a man twice his size out of the fire. Blood soaked the dirt that day, but not his, not until later. He blinked once, and the vision faded. Back in the courtyard, a small child approached from the fountain, maybe 5 or 6. The same boy who had watched before, the apple now finished. He stepped cautiously, eyes wide, and stopped just a few feet from Henry's broken chair. "Are you a soldier?" the boy asked, voice soft. Henry turned his head slowly, meeting the boy's gaze with calm eyes. He didn't smile, but his lips lifted slightly. The smallest shift, like a tide changing under moonlight. "I was," he said. The boy nodded solemnly, as if that answered everything. Then his mother called his name, urgently, but not angrily. He turned and ran, but not before offering one last glance, a look more respectful than anything Henry had received from the older boys that day. Across the street now, an engine cut. Tires crunched gravel. A car door shut, then another. Henry heard it all, but still didn't move. The broken caster had rolled near the base of the bench by the fountain. A gust lifted a napkin beside it, tumbling white over gray like surrender. But Henry didn't yield. The boys shifted uneasily. The red-hooded one looked toward the sidewalk, where two patrol cars now idled, their red and blue lights casting fractured halos across the bricks. The taller teen backed a step toward the bike rack. His eyes darted from Henry to the street. Still, Henry held his posture. No dramatics, no plea for rescue. Just breath, even silent, rising from a man who had once known far worse. And behind him now, footsteps, firm, lawful, measured, not running, approaching. The wheels of the first cruiser sighed against the curb. Its frame rocked gently as the engine cut, and for a moment the courtyard held perfectly still, the way woods quiet before a storm, not in fear, but in recognition. The red and blue of the light bar pulsed against the brick walls of the library like breath, not flashing in alarm, but steady, rhythmic, a heartbeat of authority. From the front passenger door, a tall officer stepped out with composure, not haste. He closed the door softly behind him, as if not to wake something fragile. His uniform bore the dust of the day, the crease in his trousers still sharp, and his boots touched the pavement like he'd walked this route 100 times, but never like this. Officer James Logan adjusted the brim of his hat, not out of necessity, but out of habit. The motion was precise, mechanical, in the way soldiers and sons of soldiers carry themselves when stepping onto a field where something unseen had just occurred. His eyes moved across the courtyard. One glance. That was all he needed. The broken wheelchair, the jagged wheel twisted out, the bent posture of the old man holding still with quiet defiance, the two teens frozen between amusement and discomfort, the mother by the fountain, gripping her stroller now with both hands, a librarian peering through the window, her hand half covering her mouth. Logan didn't speak. He simply began to walk. The second cruiser had pulled in behind him. Another pair of officers stepped out, younger, eyes sharp. Logan gave a brief nod, one that didn't need words. The younger men understood. They crossed toward the scene, their boots tapping rhythm on the ground, slow and intentional. No sirens, no loud commands, just presence, the kind that didn't need volume to be heard. The boys stiffened. The red-hooded one tried to laugh again, but it died on his lips. The taller boy shifted his weight backward, but Logan was already past him, his body angled toward the veteran, never the aggressors. He approached Henry Grayson from the left, his figure blocking the early autumn sun just enough to draw the veteran's eyes. The old man's posture didn't change, but something in his shoulders relaxed. Not surrender, but recognition. The kind that passes between those who've seen different wars, but understand the same terms. Logan stopped 3 feet away. No barrier, no distance. "Sir," he said, quietly, with weight. Henry looked up. His expression remained unreadable, but his nod was firm. Logan crouched slowly, lowering himself until he was eye level with the man in the chair. His knees creaked softly in protest. The sound betrayed his age more than his uniform did. "Are you hurt?" Henry's gaze lingered for a moment. Then he shook his head, slow and sure. Logan studied the frame of the chair, noting the bent wheel, the missing caster, the frayed seat straps worn through like bootlaces. He reached forward, his hand brushing the armrest gently, realigning it. Not to fix, just to acknowledge. Behind them, one of the younger officers approached the teens. "You two?" Names. Their voices stuttered, offering them up too late, too fast, too casually. But it didn't matter. They were already known. Cuffs were produced, not with ceremony, but certainty. The taller boy's shoulders dropped as the steel met his wrists. The red-hooded one looked to Logan, seeking some loophole, some chance to explain. But Logan wasn't watching them. He stayed beside Henry. As the cuffs clicked shut behind the boys, the sounds around the courtyard returned. The wind through the leaves, the distant traffic, the faint beep from the cruiser's console. People had begun to gather just inside the library doors. Observers, witnesses, but no one interrupted. One of the officers guided the teens toward the patrol car. They went quietly now, like shadows without homes. Logan remained. He glanced once toward the officer behind him and offered a single nod. "Handle it." Then he turned fully to Henry. "You mind if I sit?" he asked. Henry gestured with a tilt of his chin. Subtle. Permission given. Logan settled on the concrete beside the ramp, one boot flat, one knee bent. He didn't reach for a notebook, didn't pull out a pen, just folded his hands in front of him and looked out over the courtyard like he was sitting beside a friend waiting for a bus. Henry's voice was low, but steady. "They kicked it, right there." Bent the pin and shoved the caster off. Logan nodded. "We'll log it all. But first, you all right?" Henry hesitated, then looked at the sky. The blue was clearer now, the clouds thinner. "I've been worse." That, Logan thought, was an understatement, but he didn't say it aloud. He looked back toward the library, then at the chair, then finally at the man sitting in it. "Sir, if you're up for it, I'd like to take your statement in a bit. But not here. We'll give you time." Henry nodded once. The respect between them didn't need flourishes. It was in the spacing of their words, in the tone that didn't rise, in the way Logan kept his posture lower, not because Henry was weak, but because he was earned. The officers returned from the cruiser. The boys were locked in. The street was quiet again, but something in the air had changed. It wasn't over. It had only begun. The courtyard slowly began to reclaim its calm. A breeze stirred the leaves gathered along the edge of the planter walls, carrying with it the fading scent of roasted beans from the cafe across the street and the brittle smell of turning autumn. From where he sat beside Henry's wheelchair, Officer Logan watched as the last bits of disturbance, the teens cuffed, the murmurs from inside the library, the wide-eyed faces behind glass, all began to settle into something quieter. But nothing about this moment was done. One of the younger officers returned with a clipboard, ready to begin the formalities. Logan lifted a hand, palm up, and shook his head. Not now. Not yet. Instead, he stood, dusted off the crease at his knee, and turned back to the broken wheelchair with a deliberateness usually reserved for folded flags. The chair looked worse in the still light. Its right side collapsed, one armrest dangling by a stubborn bolt, the broken caster resting on the ground like a tooth knocked from its socket. But it wasn't the chair Logan addressed first. He looked at Henry, and then he crouched again. Not beside him this time, but in front. "You served," Logan said. It wasn't a question. Henry blinked once, then gave a slow nod. "Korea," he answered. "United States Army, infantry." Dog-face grunt. Logan nodded back, lips pressing together like a man fighting to keep something behind his teeth. Then, with the kind of reverence that came from a place deeper than the badge, he extended a hand, not to shake, but to steady. "May I?" Henry hesitated, not from mistrust, but from instinct. For a moment, he glanced down at his lap, where the snapped caster bracket sat like a fallen limb. Then he nodded. Logan gripped the edge of the frame, one hand on the seat rail, the other on the back bar. With slow care, he lifted, just enough to level the broken side so Henry sat upright again. The veteran's body adjusted to the change without complaint. His breath came steady, but his eyes met Logan's then, and in them was a glimmer of something old, something tested, something proud. The two men stayed like that, locked in a posture of quiet solidarity. No one spoke. Not even the radio clipped to Logan's belt, which had gone silent save for the occasional burst of static. Then Logan straightened, turning to face the remaining officers and the gathering few who now stepped timidly from inside the library. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The situation is under control," he said. Calm, measured. like a final stroke on a signature. To his right, the librarian, a woman in her 50s with thick glasses and worry in her hands, stepped forward, still clutching a stack of children's books. She looked at Henry, then at Logan, then at the broken chair. "I have a folding one in the back room," she offered, voice almost whispering. Henry looked at her, kind but firm. "This one'll do for now," he said. "She's carried me long enough." Logan smiled at that, almost. The kind of smile that passed quickly, like a soldier spotting a familiar face in an unfamiliar place. Then, with deliberate motion, he turned back to the younger officers. "Transport them to holding," he said. "File for vandalism, assault, and harassment." One of the teens shouted from the back of the car, "You can't do that! We didn't touch him!" Logan didn't answer. He didn't even look back. Instead, he returned to Henry's side and did something almost no one noticed. Something simple. He removed his hat, and for just a second, he stood like that, bareheaded, silent, respectful. The small group outside the library, the clerk, the boy from earlier now clutching his mother's leg, an elderly man waiting at the bus bench, all seemed to feel it at once. The change, the pause, the weight of what had just unfolded without a single shout, punch, or scream. Officer Logan bent again and retrieved the fallen caster from the bricks. He held it in his hand, then placed it gently into the pouch on Henry's lap. "A reminder," he said quietly, "of what didn't break." Henry looked at the small piece of metal and then at the officer beside him. For the first time since the chair had been attacked, he allowed a breath through his nose that almost sounded like a laugh. "I'll take good care of it." Logan nodded. He turned to leave then, motioning to the officers to finish paperwork and secure the scene. But before he stepped away, he looked once more at Henry and raised 2 fingers in a small, respectful gesture across his brow. Not quite a salute, but something older than protocol. Recognition. Then he walked away, not as a rescuer, not as a hero, but as a man who had stood where standing mattered. The squad car doors shut with a soft, decisive thunk. The kind of sound that didn't echo but settled. Into the pavement, into the air, into the consciousness of everyone who had gathered in a slow ripple from the library's walls. The teens sat in the back seats now, shadows behind glass. One leaned his forehead against the window, eyes narrowed but not defiant. The other stared blankly ahead, jaw clenched, breathing shallow. But the focus had shifted. They were no longer the center. All eyes, quietly, instinctively, were now on the old man in the battered chair and the officer standing beside him like a quiet pillar. Henry's hands rested on his lap, fingers still curled around the small, fractured caster. His eyes traced the shape of it, the way it was splintered but not shattered. One bolt still clung to the frame, like a stubborn hinge from another time. He looked forward again, and there, at the edge of the crowd, something shifted. The librarian, the one who had offered the folding chair, stepped closer, but not with words. In her arms now was something else. A jacket, thick, wool-lined, a quiet navy blue. She knelt without saying anything, and gently wrapped it across Henry's shoulders. He didn't protest. He didn't thank her. He just let it happen. From the crowd, a few more faces emerged. A man in work boots, a woman in scrubs, a teenager, not part of the earlier cruelty, stepped out with hesitant eyes. They didn't approach, not fully, but their presence had weight. It was as though the entire block had suddenly remembered something it had forgotten for too long. Logan remained still, but not absent. He reached into the inside pocket of his uniform, slowly without flourish, and retrieved a small rectangular object wrapped in aged canvas. He didn't unwrap it yet, just held it in his palm. Henry noticed. He tilted his head. Their eyes met. What passed between them wasn't language. It was something deeper, something shared by those who had worn the weight of a uniform not as costume, but as commitment. Those who had stood in places where silence meant survival and courage had nothing to do with the absence of fear. The object in Logan's hand caught a bit of sun, a dull glint of bronze beneath the folds. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a worn nameplate, the kind worn above the heart on a formal Class A jacket. The edges were smooth from time, the letters faded but still legible. Grayson. Logan extended it, palm open. Henry stared at it for a long time. "I found it," Logan said softly, "on a memorial wall restoration last spring. Pulled it from a drawer of unsorted pins. Was going to track down the name, but now I don't need to." Henry took it with both hands. The weight of it felt more than metal, a memory, compacted into a shape that once marked him as part of something bigger than himself. He held it close to his chest, fingers tight, and nodded once. Not to Logan, not to the crowd, but to something unseen. The children near the bench stopped playing. One of them, a girl with freckles and a backpack covered in stickers, approached with caution. She stepped near the wheelchair's left side, where the torn metal frame still exposed a gap. Without speaking, she reached into her school bag and pulled out a small strip of red ribbon, the kind used for bookbinding or wrapping small gifts. She tied it gently around the broken joint, looping it twice, then tucked the loose end beneath the bolt. Henry looked down at it, then back at her. Her voice was barely a whisper. "For luck." He smiled then, not wide, but real. It was the kind of smile that creased only one side of the face, the kind men like Henry Grayson rarely showed in public and never for show. The moment didn't end with applause or statements. It simply lived, and then settled, like a flag raised and held steady by invisible hands. Logan stepped back. The crowd, slowly, without being told, began to disperse, but with heads bowed slightly, steps softened, conversations quieted to murmurs of reflection. Henry remained in his chair beneath the tree, the breeze tugging lightly at the new ribbon tied to the brake, and in his lap, resting gently against his coat, the nameplate he hadn't seen in decades, and the fragment of a wheel that refused to break. The sunlight had shifted. It no longer poured down with the full brightness of midday, but came instead at an angle, stretched and golden, softening the edges of the buildings and painting long shadows across the brick courtyard. A hush had fallen over the place, not from absence, but from a kind of reverence. Even the children's voices were lower now, as if the air itself had grown older with the moment. Henry sat still beneath the ginkgo tree, the navy jacket pulled around his shoulders like a second skin. The red ribbon tied to the splintered part of his chair fluttered gently in the wind, a small flag that meant something only to those who had seen it tied. Across from him, Officer Logan had found a place on the low wall. He didn't lean, didn't slouch, just rested. His hands were clasped loosely in front of him, the tips of his fingers touching like a man familiar with both prayer and paperwork. Henry glanced down at the nameplate still sitting in his lap. "Never thought I'd see this again," he murmured, his voice like gravel polished by time. "Wore it for 3 years. Korea took more than it gave, but I held on to this till 75. Then I let it go." Logan said nothing. He knew not to. Henry lifted the nameplate, brushing it with the edge of his thumb. His fingers moved automatically, the way one might clean a blade or fold a flag. These were the same hands that had once dug into muddy hillsides, lifted wounded men onto stretchers, gripped a rifle tighter than breath. He exhaled slowly, eyes drifting upward. "I was 21 when I shipped out. Knew how to load a Browning automatic rifle and not much else. Got assigned to the Eastern Front near the 38th parallel. Cold was a different kind of enemy out there, the kind that steals your fingers while you sleep." Logan nodded once, not in response, but in respect. 3 weeks in, Henry continued, his eyes distant now. "We were hit during a night move. Mortars came down like thunder with teeth. We had one jeep left, half full of supplies, mostly morphine, rations, and radio parts. The rest was gone." He shifted in his seat. "Lieutenant was unconscious. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe I couldn't. Maybe I just didn't know what to do if I made it out alive." His hands tightened slightly. I pulled him from the burning wreck, 30 yards through mud and wire, shrapnel in my leg, shoulder dislocated. No one saw it. No one was left. The courtyard remained silent, save for the rustle of wind. I didn't tell anyone for years, Henry whispered. Didn't want a medal. Just wanted to forget the sound of bones snapping in the snow. But sometimes, his voice cracked for the first time. Sometimes forgetting means losing the part of yourself that held it all together. Logan reached into his pocket slowly. From it, he pulled a small metal case, unmarked, worn from use. He opened it, revealing a folded slip of yellowed paper. He didn't hand it over, just held it in view. "It's a citation," Logan said gently, "filed by a chaplain who passed through the area. Found it last year while researching lost commendations. No name on it. But the story, the jeep, the lieutenant, the burn scars, the time frame. It was you." Henry didn't look at the paper. Instead, he looked at Logan. There was a moment between them then, long and without breath, where something ancient passed from one man to another. It wasn't about medals. It wasn't even about the war. It was about truth, about the cost of doing what's right, even when no one watches. Henry leaned forward slightly, voice low. "The hardest part," he said, "is coming home and realizing no one knows what you've survived. You go to the store, you sit at the bus stop, you listen to teenagers yell at screens, and you wonder if you really made it back, or if you're still buried in some frozen hill halfway around the world." He tapped the broken caster beside him. "This chair's just a chair, but it's taken me more places than most people's feet. When they broke it." He paused. It wasn't the metal they were tearing. Logan looked down at his hands. Slowly, reverently, he closed the citation folder and returned it to his pocket. "I understand," he said. "Not fully, but enough." They sat in stillness then. Two men, one older, one younger, connected not by uniform or law, but by something older than both. A commitment to what endures. The sun dipped lower. In the library's doorway, a small boy watched the two men in silence. In his hand was a book too big for his frame. Its spine was torn, its cover faded, but he clutched it the way a soldier might clutch orders from home. After a moment, the boy stepped forward, placed the book on the ground near Henry's chair, and walked back inside. The following morning arrived gently, as if the town itself had decided to breathe a little slower. Mist clung to the library lawn, caught in the thin beams of morning sun that filtered between the rows of ginkgo and elm. Dew glistened on the pavement bricks, tiny mirrors reflecting a world still waking. Outside the library courtyard, a flatbed truck was parked beside the curb, engine ticking as it cooled. From the back, two men in denim jackets carefully lifted a large object wrapped in cloth and canvas, their movements deliberate, respectful. No horns, no ceremony, just work, done with care. Henry sat beneath the same tree, waiting. He hadn't been told why. Maria, the librarian, stood nearby with a mug of something warm. She smiled faintly, her hands cupped around the mug not for warmth, but as if holding something sacred. Her eyes followed the men as they crossed the flagstone path and approached the old veteran with the canvas-covered object between them. One of the workers, a man with sawdust in his beard, met Henry's eyes and nodded. "Got a delivery for you," he said. Henry's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. He just turned his chair slightly, his eyes narrowing as the canvas was pulled away, inch by inch. Beneath it sat a new wheelchair. Not glossy, not flashy, but solid. Dark wood armrests polished to a gentle sheen. Reinforced wheels. Custom leather seat, soft but firm. It looked built not for comfort but for respect, for someone who had earned both. Carved into the backrest, barely deeper than the grain, was a name, his name, not in capital letters, not screaming, but resting there like a quiet truth. Henry Grayson beneath it, etched into the wood as if meant to remain for generations, were the words, "Rolling with honor." Henry didn't say anything. He simply let out a slow breath, one hand rising to trace the carved letters with his fingertip. His other hand rested on the worn wheel of his old chair, the one broken, scuffed, dented from years of use, and one cruel moment of destruction. The workers stepped back, giving him space. Maria moved quietly beside him. She placed her hand on the handle of the old chair, her voice gentle. "Would you like help transferring over?" Henry shook his head, not unkindly. He placed both palms on the old armrests and pushed, slowly, with care. His knees trembled slightly beneath him. The strain showed in his face, but he did not ask for help. He stood. Then, with silent determination, he turned and lowered himself into the new seat. A long exhale escaped his chest, not from exhaustion, but something deeper. A release. A settling of weight, long carried. Around him, the library staff had begun to emerge. From the side entrance, the local carpenter who had done the woodwork came forward, a small chisel still in his back pocket. He tipped his hat. A mother wheeled her baby closer and stopped, her eyes moist. A boy near the bike rack clutched his backpack a little tighter, saying nothing. They were not clapping. They didn't need to. A few moments later, Logan arrived. Not in uniform today. Just a gray sweater and dark jeans. But his presence was unchanged. Strong, grounded. A man who knew when to speak, and when silence held more weight. He approached, stopped a foot away, and looked at the chair. Then at Henry. "Fitting," he said. Henry nodded. "You were part of this?" Logan shook his head. "They did this. I just made a few phone calls." From the bench near the tree, a folded quilt appeared, carefully laid there earlier by someone from the senior center. It bore patches sewn by veterans' families. In the center, a simple design. An eagle in flight, holding a ribbon of stars across its wings. Logan unfolded it halfway and laid it gently across Henry's legs. Neither man said anything more. Across the street, someone snapped a photo. Not for fame, not for the news, but for memory. A keepsake. Later, it would hang in the library's front lobby, but not as a statement, just as a moment. Henry turned his face upward, letting the sunlight warm the creases of his skin. A faint breeze moved the leaves above like applause, too humble to make noise. His fingers curled along the new wheel, and with a gentle push, he moved forward. Slowly, deliberately, dignity in motion. A week passed. The story had traveled quietly, like most true things do. Not through headlines, but through word of mouth, passed from neighbor to neighbor, whispered between library shelves, and tucked gently into the corners of community bulletin boards. No one made a spectacle of it. There were no grand declarations, no rallies. Just a shift, subtle but unmistakable, in the rhythm of the town. The library courtyard had changed. The bench that once stood alone near the tree now bore a small plaque. It had not been placed with ceremony, but it had weight nonetheless. Etched into it were 6 words that seemed to settle deep into the soul of anyone who paused to read them. To those who roll with courage. Henry returned every Thursday. He arrived earlier now, just after the doors opened. The mornings were quieter then, and the light poured in soft through the front windows. His new wheelchair moved smoothly across the bricks, each turn of the wheel as steady as the hands that guided it. Children had begun to notice him. They didn't avoid him anymore. They approached, sat near him, asked questions. Some brought books, dog-eared and worn. Others came just to listen. He never started the conversations. He never needed to. His presence invited them. One small boy, no more than 7, had made it a routine. Every Thursday, he brought a sheet of folded paper. Inside was a single drawing, stick figures, stars, flags, sometimes a tank with crooked wheels. Henry always took them with both hands, unfolded them slowly, and smiled. Across the street, Officer Logan passed by during his morning rounds. He never stopped for long, just enough for a wave, a nod, a glance shared between men who had once exchanged more than words under a harder sun. One morning, as Logan crossed the road, he noticed something new. Two young men stood at the edge of the courtyard. Their postures were awkward, unsure, and their clothes still bore the stiffness of uniforms not worn by choice. They carried bags of mulch, tools, buckets. They walked toward the garden beds with downcast eyes, guided by an older veteran with a clipboard and a firm voice. He didn't bark orders, but his presence commanded more than obedience. It called for reflection. These were the same teens from that morning, the ones who had broken more than a chair. Now they moved differently, not fully changed, not saints, but slower, heavier, as if some part of the weight they once mocked had settled onto their shoulders. They didn't speak to Henry, but they looked at him. And when their eyes met, Henry didn't look away. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply saw them, fully, in the way only someone who had known war and youth and loss could. Later that day, one of the boys placed a new potted plant beside the bench with the plaque. A single ribbon was tied to its base. It was red, not bright, not perfect, but it was there. Henry sat back beneath the tree, watching the wind move through the leaves like breath, returning to a place that had once gone still. He rested his hands on the wheels of the chair. His eyes closed, just for a moment, and in that stillness, something new had begun. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.